This morning at approximately 3:45, 3:47, we have reports of a plane down in the Murphy Canyon neighborhood. San Diego Fire quickly coordinated a response for a plane down incident, and our units responded and started to investigate.
We had officers from throughout the city that responded. We had over 50 officers that were able to get here within minutes. We started evacuating all of the homes that were impacted. We had an evacuation center up at Miller Elementary. We have close to 100 people that have been displaced and are up there.
Through the housing units that we have down here, no one was transported out of the housing units. That's where I say we were lucky in that fact that no one from those homes was injured that we've had so far. We had some possible minor injuries, but no one was transported from the scene from any of the housing units. All the fatalities right now look to be that they're from the plane.
Any communication from the pilot?
We don't have anything on the communication from the pilot.
Was the Montgomery Tower open at the time, overnight?
I believe so, but that's something that the FAA can answer for you.
Bird flu is now infecting cats at a surprising rate, and it's evolving fast enough that scientists are now warning of a potential future pandemic that could affect humans. A first of its kind global review done by researchers from the University of Maryland School of Public Health has uncovered over 600 cases of bird flu in cats worldwide. That's over the last 20 years. They range from household pets to tigers in zoos. More than half of those cases were fatal. According to Dr. Christine Coleman, the lead author of the study, the virus has evolved. It's now jumping from birds to cats, cows to cats, and even between cats. She warns that with summer approaching worldwide, cases are likely to rise again, both on farms and in the wild. Cats are catching the bird flu in several ways: by eating infected birds, raw chicken feed, or even drinking raw milk from infected cows, that is. The virus is also spreading between mammals, such as pet cats infecting other pets, or tigers passing it to other big cats. The symptoms in infected cats are severe, to name some: brain swelling, fever, and aggression. Many of these cases are mistaken for rabies. The most deadly strain of bird flu, that is the H5N1, now reportedly makes up the majority of infections in domestic cats and has a current case fatality rate of 90%. In humans, bird flu is slightly less deadly but still serious, killing around half of the 950 people who have been infected globally. And since April 2022, the US has reported 67 human cases and 1 death. What's worrying is that cats are rarely tested for bird flu. In most cases, the diagnosis happens only after death. Experts believe the real number of infections may be much higher. Scientists are especially worried about outbreaks in animal shelters and places where cats live in close quarters. If the virus enters shelters, it could spread rapidly and potentially infect humans, similar to a bird flu outbreak in New York City in 2016. So far, there are no confirmed cases of bird flu spreading from human to human, but researchers warn that as the virus continues to mutate, it may eventually become airborne, and that could change everything. Future research will focus on testing high-risk cat populations, especially farm cats, in the future.
A warning for concert goers. People who attended a Shakira show in New Jersey may have been exposed to measles. The New Jersey Department of Health says a person infected with measles who does not live in the state attended Shakira's May 15th show at MetLife Stadium. The venue holds more than 82,000 people. Officials are now urging attendees to make sure they're up to date on their vaccinations. According to the CDC, measles usually takes 11 to 12 days to incubate. The health department warns that if exposure occurred at the concert, symptoms could develop anytime between now and June 6th. Symptoms include a high fever, cough, runny nose, watery red eyes, and a rash that typically appears a few days later. If you think you may have been exposed, health officials recommend masking, isolating, getting tested, and contacting your health provider. Measles has been on the rise in the U.S., with over 1,000 cases confirmed across 30 states this year alone. 3 of those cases have resulted in death. As of the latest update, no additional cases linked to the concert have been confirmed by New Jersey officials. They warn individuals at risk are those who have not been fully vaccinated or have never had measles in the past. With
U.S. President Donald Trump's first big legislation of his second term, his big tax bill has cleared the U.S. House of Representatives in a late-night vote. But what does it mean for India and for Indians? For Indian nationals staying in the U.S., sending money back home could now burn a hole in your pockets. The bill, dubbed One Big Beautiful Bill Act, that's what the bill is called, proposes a 5% tax on all international money transfers made by non-immigrant visa holders and green card holders. When passed as a law, it would withhold 5% of the remitted amount at the point of transfer. No exemption threshold limit has been set yet, which means it would even apply to transfers of small denominations. This could majorly impact Indian households and exert downward pressure on the Indian rupee. Well, coming back now to how it impacts the immigrants. Well, in multiple ways. First, it provides $46.5 billion to revive construction of Trump's wall along the U.S.-Mexico border and an infusion of $350 billion for his deportation agenda. And these, by the way, are not just true for illegal immigrants, but also those living legally in the U.S. Now, as far as Indians are concerned, the law could be a massive financial blow to nearly 4.5 million Indians living in the U.S., including nearly 3.2 million people of Indian origin. And according to a remittance survey published by the Reserve Bank of India, the Indian community may have to reportedly pay $1.6 billion as remittance tax. And that's huge and comes at the risk of even destabilizing the Indian currency. This perhaps could be hard-hitting for millions of Indian families in states like Kerala, Uttar Pradesh and Bihar who rely on remittances to cover essential expenses like education, healthcare and housing, among others.
A critical moment for Somalia. This is one of the conclusions the UN Special Rapporteur on Counterterrorism and Human Rights made following his official visit to the conflict-torn country earlier this month. Somalia has been struggling for years to fight back against terrorism. Its political system is fragile, weakened by corruption, power struggles and a severe lack of resources.
The centralization of political power, irregular and contested processes of constitutional reform, which have alienated some federal member states, excessive political influence of some major clans. So here I urge Somalia to embark on a genuinely inclusive, bottom-up, transparent and meaningful national political dialogue to ensure political power is fairly distributed and includes minorities, and to redouble efforts to combat corruption.
The most prominent active Islamist terrorist group in Somalia is Al-Shabaab. At the beginning of 2025, it launched an offensive in central Somalia, endangering the capital Mogadishu and leaving Somalian armed forces on the defensive.
I'm pleased that Somalia has encouraged high-level defections from Al-Shabaab and pursued the DDR process, but I encourage the government to intensify its efforts to negotiate with receptive elements of Al-Shabaab, if they can be found, and to seek political reconciliation where this is feasible.
The rapporteur also called for the international community to assist Somalia in its efforts to build peace and strengthen the rule of law. A full report with the findings from the visit is expected to be presented at the UN next year.
South Africans expressed disappointment and concern on Wednesday following a tense meeting between U.S. President and South African presidents, where Trump confronted Ramaphosa with unfounded allegations about systematic targeting of white farmers in South Africa.
It didn't go as well as President Ramaphosa expected. Trump was pretty much prepared for him. And he ran with that narrative of South Africa being a very violent society, perpetrating targeted killings against white farmers. And, his choice of what horrible things happening there. And therefore, the president and his team did not have a comeback as far as that perception is concerned. They didn't succeed in allaying that perception. I think they were caught off guard.
On the streets of Johannesburg, the reaction was equally critical, where the question Ramaphosa's visit to U.S. given the current state of U.S.-South Africa relations. President Ramaphosa had aimed to use the meeting to correct misconceptions and repair diplomatic ties.
I honestly don't understand why Ramaphosa is actually in the United States when Trump has made it very clear how he feels about South Africa and his feelings on South Africa, especially with what happened recently regarding the Afrikaners just leaving. I also think that it's been used as a lure by Elon Musk to kind of negotiate Starlink being used in South Africa. And I think that's very problematic.
Political observers say future engagements between the two countries will require more strategic preparation and clearer message from South Africa.
We start our bulletin with a story from the U.S. capital, Washington, D.C., one of the most protected and heavily guarded place on the planet. It was supposed to be a night of diplomacy, connection, and celebration. Instead, it turned into a tragedy. Gunfire erupted outside the Capitol Jewish Museum in downtown Washington, D.C. late on Wednesday night. What followed were scenes of horror, confusion, and heartbreak. Two Israeli embassy staffers, Yaron Lischensky and Sarah Lynn Milgram, were shot dead just a few steps away from the venue. The suspected gunman, 30-year-old Elias Rodriguez from Chicago, has been seen loitering outside the museum, pacing, watching, waiting. Then, without warning, he opened fire with a handgun on a group of 4 people. Eyewitnesses say he later shouted "Free Palestine" while being arrested by the law enforcement.
The suspect who was detained is 30-year-old Elias Rodriguez of Chicago. After the shooting outside the museum, he entered inside and then was detained. 2 people who were inside the museum at the time told the Associated Press that they heard at least 10 gunshots. Afterward, they saw the shooter inside the museum. He was wearing a red keffiyeh, which is a traditional Middle Eastern headdress. And while he was being detained, they told us that he shouted "Free Palestine."
In the chaos, Rodriguez, the suspected attacker, was briefly mistaken as a victim and allowed entry into the building before his true role in the tragedy was revealed.
We heard between 10 to 15 gunshots, roughly. I don't know the exact number. And all of us were a little bit startled, but, I'm from D.C., so gunshots are not pleasant, but not something I've never heard before. And the security guard happened to let this guy in. I guess they were thinking that he was a victim. And he was covered in rain. He was clearly in trauma. He was in shock. And, some of the people at the event brought him water. They sat him down. Are you okay? Were you shot? What happened? And he's like, somebody call the cops.
As the details emerged, a more tragic tale came to light. Lischensky worked as a research assistant at the Israeli embassy. He moved to Israel from Germany at the age of 16. He was also a passionate photographer, while Sarah Milgram worked at the Israeli embassy's Department of Public Diplomacy. She was an American citizen. It has now been revealed that Lischensky had bought an engagement ring and was just days away from proposing to Milgram during their planned trip to Jerusalem.
The couple that was gunned down tonight in the name of Free Palestine. It's a young couple about to be engaged. The young man purchased a ring this week with the intention of proposing to his girlfriend next week in Jerusalem. They were a beautiful couple who came to enjoy an evening in Washington's Cultural Center.
The shooting comes at a time of deepening global unrest. Israel's war with Hamas in Gaza continues, while ceasefire efforts remain stalled. The Jewish community, both in America and globally, now finds itself staring at the ugly face of violent anti-Semitism once again. The shooting comes at a volatile moment as fighting rages in Gaza and diplomatic efforts to broker a ceasefire are deadlocked. This incident has heightened fears for Israeli diplomats and Jewish communities worldwide. Israel's foreign minister called the shooting a direct result of toxic anti-Semitic incitement that has surged since the October 2023 Hamas terror attack.
This is what happens when leaders in the world surrender to the Palestinian terrorist propaganda and serve it. The statements and attacks blame Israel instead of Hamas. Hamas started the war on October 7th, is solely responsible for the war's continuation, and is solely responsible for the suffering of Israelis and Palestinians alike.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered security measures to be stepped up at Israeli diplomatic missions worldwide, while Israelis say they don't feel safe anywhere.
It's very sad to see that it's become a day-to-day event that all over the world, in Israel and all over the world, you hear about terror attacks on Jews and on Israelis, and it's constant and it never gives up. Jews don't feel safe anywhere. The reasons why these attacks happen is there's anti-Semitism and hatred of Zionists, of the will of Jews to live. That's the base of it. And any fighting between Jews is not the reason why other people want to attack Jews.
Israel's president has condemned the killing of 2 Israeli embassy staff in Washington as a despicable act of anti-Semitism. Officers say the victims, a man and a woman, were leaving an event at the Capitol Jewish Museum Wednesday evening when a suspect approached a group of 4 people and opened fire. The suspected gunman, identified by police as 30-year-old Elias Rodriguez, reportedly shouted "Free, free Palestine" as he was arrested. At a news conference following the attack, Israeli ambassador to the US, Yishiel Leiter, revealed that the couple had been planning to get engaged. Leiter said the male victim had purchased a ring earlier this week and had planned to propose during a trip to Jerusalem. The victims' names have not been released. President Donald Trump suggested the killings were motivated by anti-Semitism and that there is no place for hate in the US. Meanwhile, the Israeli embassy expressed full confidence that authorities would protect Israel's representatives and Jewish communities throughout the United States.
All right, let's now give you some breaking news that in fact just come in, where Russia reportedly has started to create a buffer zone along its border with Ukraine. The announcement was made by President Vladimir Putin during a meeting with government officials. Moscow has said that Russian troops are currently engaged in implementing this initiative, and the decision comes a day after President Putin visited the Kirkuk region. And Russia had regained full control of the Kirkuk region in late April following months of fighting by its troops.
As I said earlier, the decision to create a necessary buffer security zone along borders with Ukraine had been already made. Our armed forces are accomplishing this task now. Enemy firing points are being suppressed. The work is proceeding.
All right, now to give us more perspective in terms of what this, of course, means, we're joined by Mr. Fred Weir, who's a senior journalist, and he's, of course, joining us live from Moscow. Mr. Weir, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on WION. And let me, in fact, start off by asking you this. Now, this is an interesting bit of, report that comes forth where Putin has said that Russia is now engaged in the process of creating a buffer zone in Ukrainian territory. What is the message that Putin is trying to say with this?
So I think it's first of all to the Russian people who were, blindsided by that invasion of Kursk last year, the invasion of Russian territory. It created a lot of nervousness. And our constant Ukrainian drone and artillery attacks across the border on Russian towns and cities and military objectives. So this is Putin's statement, I think, that he will not let that sort of thing happen anymore. Secondly, I guess Russia is moving toward an end game in the Ukraine war. and they will want some kind of permanent situation if there's to be a ceasefire or peace settlement. Russia will want it to be on their terms, and I think buffer zones will be definitely a part of whatever final settlement is devised.
You know, that's an interesting statement you're making, that towards the end game, the Russians would want to have buffer zones in Ukraine. Does this now mean that Vladimir Putin feels that he has conquered enough territory in Ukraine, and now, if he were to create these buffer zones, he can bring this war to an end? So is this a part of a plan by Vladimir Putin to now slowly inch towards bringing this war to an end?
Well, I think so, but I don't think it would be a unilateral Russian move to end the war. There are peace talks being scheduled now, maybe start in mid-June in the Vatican, perhaps. So there will be a process in which the two sides will negotiate and horse trade. And so I think that this buffer zone thing is part of that. The more territory, even temporary territory that Russia has, the bigger its bargaining chips in the negotiations. But in the meantime, I think they simply don't want to be blindsided by a sudden Ukrainian thrust into Russian territory.
You know,
as
this
they were
particular
before.
statement is a very strange sort of a statement that's come forth, that Russia is now creating buffer zones, which means that they may not want to, conquer or capture more territory. How much do you think are reports that Donald Trump feels that Vladimir Putin is not interested in peace has prompted the Russian president to now put out a statement of this nature? Because Donald Trump, to a very large extent in the last 5 months, had been batting for peace with the Russians. He said that if he were to sit down with the Russian president, then the peace would be achieved in Ukraine. But the statement that was put out by Donald Trump, at least the reports that have come out, that the Russian president does not look interested in peace because he thinks that he is winning the war on the ground. So is there a message that Putin is now trying to give to Donald Trump?
Not in this case. I think the buffer zones are just along the Russian-Ukrainian border in the north, not along the main contact line between the two armies. In that respect, the Russians are still pressing forward, and they intend to continue pressing forward along the Donbass front, the Zaporozhye front. The war is still very much ongoing, but the buffer zones are to prevent any surprises in the north, as did happen before.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Fred Weir, for joining.
3 years since it began, the Russia-Ukraine war rages beyond the battlefield. While tanks roll and missiles strike, there's another war which is being fought, one of spies and sanctions. 11 Western countries have accused a Russian military intelligence hacking group of targeting defense, transport and tech firms involved in helping Ukraine. They have now issued a joint statement against the Russian campaign, which targeted organizations involved in the coordination, transport and supply of foreign assistance to Ukraine. They say Unit 26165 of the Russian Military Intelligence Service, also known in the cybersecurity world as Fancy Bear or APT-28, carried out the campaign for more than 2 years. UK even went on to say that Russia's GRU unit accessed cameras near crossings, military installations and rail stations at key European locations. The MI6 Secret Service further alleged that Russia tried to hack into border security cameras to spy on and disrupt the flow of Western aid entering Ukraine. But how is the West responding to all of this? With tools of economic warfare. The European Union is readying a fresh round of sanctions against Russia after leaders threatened Moscow with a massive economic punishment for not agreeing to a ceasefire in Ukraine. Remember, after the 2-hour phone call between the US President Donald Trump and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin, Trump said that the ceasefire talks will begin immediately. However, Moscow has not set a deadline for next steps. Since Russian tanks rolled over Ukraine's border 3 years ago, the EU has sought to hurt Moscow's war effort with unprecedented sanctions. In the latest, the European Union approved a 17th round of sanctions package against Russia. However, all these sanctions have failed to collapse Russia's economy. Despite several rounds of talks, there's still no ceasefire in sight. And while diplomats posture and economies brace for retaliation, the true battle rages behind the screens. Hackers versus firewalls, secrets versus counterintelligence. We now shift attention to the East China Sea, where Chinese military helicopters and foreign aircraft reportedly faced off in a string of confrontations. According to Chinese state media, the PLA recorded 11 aerial incidents over 10 straight days. These mid-air encounters reportedly brought helicopters from both the sides within a mere 10 meters of each other, a distance that leaves zero room for error. Although Beijing has not named the foreign military involved, the Chinese state media report described them as deliberate provocations. The incidents reportedly involved a pilot from the PLA's Ground Forces Aviation Corps operating under the Eastern Theatre Command, the division responsible for military operations in the East China Sea and across the Taiwan Strait. It is worth noting here that the PLA Ground Forces helicopters typically don't engage in maritime interceptions due to their limited operational range. The PLA Z-19, the light reconnaissance and attack chopper believed to be used in these face-offs, only has a radius of around 200 to 250 kilometers. And this suggests that these confrontations likely occurred very close to China's coastline. A PLA pilot claimed that he spotted the foreign helicopter amid low visibility and determined that it had been launched from a nearby warship. He added that the same aircraft returned the next day, prompting a pursuit above the clouds. In recent years, Chinese and foreign militaries have routinely come face to face in these contested skies and waters, often dangerously very close. Well, the East China Sea is an important, vital body of water bordered by several key countries. To the west, it touches the eastern coastline of China. To the north lies South Korea, and to the east, Japan's southern islands. To the south, Taiwan claims sovereignty over some islands. Well, all these countries have either direct economic interests in the region or ongoing territorial disputes that have made the East China Sea one of the most militarized and politically sensitive maritime zones in the world.
כמה אני רואה אתכם חלשים. אתם אנשים חלשים. חלשים מאוד מאוד מאוד. אחרי שנה וחצי על מלחמה שהרגתם בה 19,000 ילדים, 53,000 תושבים. הרסתם את כל האוניברסיטאות, את כל בתי החולים, ואתם, אין ניצחון פוליטי. אתם מרגישים שאין ניצחון פוליטי. לכן משתגעים. למה אתם משתגעים? למה אתם חלשים? למה אתם עצובים? למה אתם לא שמחים? למה? בגלל שאין ניצחון פוליטי. רק מלחמה נגד רק מלחמה נגד חפים מפשע. זה מה שאתם עושים. להוריד את חבר הכנסת עודה מהדוכן.
World of Sign.
gidiyor şu an. Üçüncü araç mı?
Ay gitti. Ay araba gitti.
Страшно, правда? Посмотрите, как страшно.
So, can somebody tell me what the heck is this? And I'm not using no app. I am on County Road 2 in between State Avenue and K32. And I have never seen anything like that in my life. And it appears that little black stuff is falling down the center of it. That is just weird. And then just to let you all know, I'm not kidding here. This is real. Sorry, that's my phone doing that because it's a piece of crap Motorola. But just so you can see, it's me. And I'm live. And it's starting to dissipate. Look at that. Tell me that is not freaking weird. I have no idea. I've been recording it. It was a dark black circle, and now it's dissipating. I mean, it looks like somebody blew a big old smoke ring.